Hi, guys, and welcome back to Drive to School Chat, where we discuss a subtopic in geography on our way to school. Now, today, I'd like us to talk about the demographic transition model. And when we are talking about demography, we are referring to population. And therefore, the demographic transition model shows us how a country's population changes as that country develops. And therefore, the demographic transition model can actually indicate to us whether a country is developed or not, depending on what stage it's at on that demographic transition model. Okay, so let's go through the stages then. So the demographic transition model actually stipulates that there are 4 stages in a country's population growth as it develops. And the first stage is the high stationary stage. Now, the high stationary stage is where the birth rates and the death rates are really high and the population is fluctuating. So sometimes it's growing, sometimes it's not growing. And that's because both birth rate and death rates are really high. So during the instances where you have high birth rates, a slightly higher birth rate than the death rate, then the population grows. And then if you have a slightly higher death rate than the birth rate, then the population declines. And that will indicate to us that that country is likely to be a poor country or at the initial stages of its development. So LIC, and for that matter, a very poor LIC, because high birth rates and high death rates imply that um, the healthcare in that country is not that great. The diets are not likely to be that great because the death rate is high. And then the birth rates may be high because the community or the society is agrarian based. They rely on agriculture to supply their food. So they're in the primary sector of industry. And if they're in the primary sector of industry, in a lot of cases, they will have more children so that those children can help them um, on the farms. So that then indicates to us that a country is in its initial stages of economic development or is a poor country or LIC for that matter. All right, now let's move on to the second stage. And the second stage is the early expanding stage. And the early expanding stage, during the early expanding stage, um, the death rate begins to go down fairly sharply. Now, that death rate is likely to be going down because there's improvement in healthcare in that country. There's also improvement in sanitation and in food supply. And as that happens, then that death rate rather, is likely to go down. But then birth rate remains fairly high. And because there is a huge or a big discrepancy now between the birth rate and the death rate, the population begins to grow steadily. So instead of the population being a fluctuating population, in the second stage, the population is actually growing steadily due to that difference or disparity between birth rates and death rates. So that then is the second stage. So then moving on to the third stage, and that is the late expanding stage. And during the late expanding stage, the birth rate as well begins to fall. Now, at this point, the death rates are fairly low, but the birth rate as well now begins to fall. Why is the birth rate going to fall? Now, it's going to fall because there will be increased mechanization in farming, which means that machinery is going to be used in farming as opposed to having a need for farm hands or laborers to work on those farms. So that then means that people will not see the need to have children so that they can help them on the farms. And therefore, the birth rates are going to go down. And then another reason why those birth rates are also likely to be going down is because there is a likelihood that as the country develops, then ways for family planning are available. So, for example, there's a lot more contraception, and people are educated about it or are beginning to become educated about it, and therefore they now have the opportunity to plan their families, and that will lead to lower birth rates. The fourth stage is the low stationary stage. And at this stage, the population is steady. And the reason why the population is steady is because the birth rates are now low and the death rates are now low as well. And therefore, the population is growing, but growing very, very slowly. And that is typical of a lot of HIC countries where the population is growing, but not necessarily that quickly. However, having said that, there are also instances where the population might actually be experiencing negative population growth, which means that the death rates in some countries may be slightly higher than the birth rates, meaning that the population in those countries is declining. Okay, so that is the demographic transition model, and it shows us how the population of a country changes or evolves as that country develops. And it has those four stages. The first one being the high stationary stage. Then we have the early expanding stage. Then the late expanding stage. And then finally, the low stationary stage. Okay, so thank you very much for joining me in this Drive to School chat and on this journey towards excellent exam results. If you have a topic that you'd like us to discuss on the way to school, please do let me know in the comment section below, and we shall be sure to discuss it one of these fine mornings on our way to school. All the best, and see you again soon. Bye-bye.